Warning, Paranoid Sisters podcast contains disturbing content, explicit language, and opinionated views. Listener discretion is advised.
This podcast talks about the victim's story and does not glorify any crimes. All right, welcome back to the Paranoid Sisters. I'm Sam.
And I'm Felicia.
Today, we have a special guest. We're going to go inside the mind of a medical examiner, or should we say the
former chief medical examiner and elected coroner of El Paso County.
Just so everyone knows, if this is your first podcast or for Mr. Kelly, our podcast focuses on discussing true cases in Colorado, true crime cases, I should say, with an emphasis on the critical role that medical examiners or anyone in the criminal field plays, because the cases that we read and we investigate rely heavily on the findings of testimonies from the medical examiner, obviously the autopsy you perform, but also serve as the foundation for understanding the circumstances and uncovering the truth.
Yeah, that's true. I'm Dr. Leon Kelly. I'm a forensic pathologist and a medical examiner. And I've been here in Colorado since 2003, but I was at the El Paso County Coroner's Office starting in 2008 and worked there in various capacities, first as the Deputy Chief Medical Examiner and then as the Chief Medical Examiner and elected coroner until the end of 2024. Recently taken a position as a professor at one of our Colorado medical schools. But yeah, you're exactly right. What we do in the morgue, translates directly to in cases of criminal acts, murders, homicides. That's the foundational facts that we use to figure out kind of what happened, what went wrong, and ultimately who's responsible for these deaths.
Yep. And I'm always fascinated what comes out of the investigation, right? Because you have the detectives in there, but then, like you said, the true facts, the person, the victim who is presented to you at that point to be like, okay, can you tell us what happened from your perspective and your educational background and everything? But so you guys can see that we have kind of like a celebrity here, like our local celebrity. So not to make you blush or anything. But before we go into anything else, we just kind of have a disclaimer that we read when we're talking to Inside the Mind of. So some of the statements our guest provides today are related to his personal beliefs and experience and are not associated with his current or previous employer. So thank you, Leon, for joining us today on the Paranoid Sisters podcast. Can you tell us a little bit about your personal self? Maybe a little bit of background, any hobbies, family, if you want to go into that.
Yeah, I'm originally from Indiana. Grew up in Indianapolis. I came to Colorado for my residency in pathology that I did at Penrose St. Francis. Married. I have 2 kids who are both teenagers, and they certainly, now they're to the age that they know what Dad does. Mm-hmm. When they were little, we had to be a little more careful. When they were really small, we'd say, "Dad's a doctor who helps firemen and police figure out what happened when bad stuff happens." So, and then of course, they go to school, and at some point, some kid who will, I'm sure, learn from their parents told their kid, "Hey, do you know what their dad does?" And so eventually you have to have that conversation. And, our dinner table conversations, my wife isn't in medicine. She's in public relations, but, it's, you share a life and you sit around the table at dinner and she says, "How was your day?" And my day is like nobody else's day. And so, they've grown up in it, so they understand it. And they seem to be well adjusted. And, I'm a normal guy. I do a very intense job. But, I don't sleep in a coffin. My house is Ferratu's castle. Like, it's a normal life. It's just, I'm a doctor, but the patients that I take care of are all deceased. And they got that way generally for a bad thing, unexpectedly, or some sort of trauma. And it's a tough job. So you have to have things outside of the office, outside of that role and responsibility that brings light into your life and gives you the opportunity to remind yourself, sometimes consciously, that the world can still be a beautiful place. And so I love movies. That's my passion. That's how I've kind of found my tribe as a kid and how I kind of came to see the world. And so I have my best friend is a forensic pathologist as well, like myself, Dr. Felter, and we run a horror film festival called 6 Feet Under Horror Film Fest. And
You're speaking our language.
In our 4th year, we host them at Roadhouse Cinema. And so we spent a lot of our time, prepping for that and bringing guests in and curating films. And, our idea of Eden is, sitting in a dark room with all of our friends and screaming and laughing and having a great time. And
Sounds great to me.
so that's what, that's most of my outside of work life.
I think you found 2 new tribe members because if it's not true crime and you can ask Alicia, we're always like, come over and watch a scary movie with me, or, and something new comes out. Like, that's kind of our
And everyone's like, absolutely not. Only you two.
yeah. And I'm like, the cheesier, the better. I love it. I love it.
I'm like, with you.
So, I mean, that's, I love that. I love that you're like, I'm just like a normal guy. My job's just very different from, I don't punch a time card. I don't have a desk, or you do have a desk, but I mean, like,
It's not a table.
you have one of each, right? For each purpose.
So what inspired you to pursue a career to become a medical examiner?
So it's one of those things that as it was happening, it seemed incredibly uncertain. When you look back, I don't know that there's anything else I could have done. But essentially, as a kid, I was a pretty introverted kid. I liked art. I liked drawing. I did play sports, and that was kind of my outlet. But like I said, I watched a lot of movies, and so I spent a lot of time kind of by myself and in my own head, and wasn't super social, but I wasn't great at school, to be honest with you. It wasn't until I was probably hit late high school. My parents were divorced. They had divorced when I was about 2.5, and my mom had severe mental illness, and it was the 80s, and so no matter what the circumstances were, the mom was generally going to get custody, and so I lived with my mom on the weeks in a trailer park on the west side of Indianapolis, and went to my dad's on the weekend. And my dad had remarried, and I had kind of a normal middle class upbringing on the weekends, and then a lot of chaos and challenges on the week. And it wasn't until I kind of made the decision about 14, 15 that I needed to get out of that situation. And so I went and lived with my dad at that point, and he would bring me to school. And so my grades turned around, and I had much more stability. And then I decided I want to go to college. I had no idea what I wanted to do, but really my plan was I just don't want to waste my dad's money when I went. And once I got there, I knew I had kind of an enjoyment of science. I like to learn about how the world worked. And I felt like the more I could understand about the world of work, the better I would feel in it, right? And got to college and suddenly realized I was smarter than I kind of thought I did. I thought I was, and found some really good mentors and really fell in love with science, but also still had this passion for art at the same time. So as I progressed through, my stepmom worked at the dental school, and so I spent most summers working there to make money, and then also doing some research. So I thought I was going to be a dentist, and then I got through about halfway through undergrad, and having spent a couple of summers doing dental research, realized that, no offense to the dentists out there, but it was the most mind-numbingly boring thing. I'm like, I can't do this forever. So by that point, I had pretty good grades. And so I thought, well, I'll see if I can get into medical school. And only about 1 in 10 people who applied at that time would get in. And so you could say you want to be a doctor, but it doesn't mean you're getting in. And so I applied, and I did. And I never had any thought about what kind of doctor I wanted to be. I was just looking at like the next step in front of me. And by then I had met friends in college who were also going to medical school, and many of them had come from multi-generations of physicians. And here I was, like this trailer park kid who had no idea what I was doing or why I was there. And you just figure yourself out along the way, and what you like and what you don't like, and kind of what your personality is, and in a lot of ways to what kind of life you wanted to lead. And I had grown up, like I said, in a kind of blue collar. My dad's a construction worker, and kind of learned that, you put value on working with your hands and learning a trade or a craft. And so I thought, well, I'll be a surgeon. And so I started medical school with that intention. And then quickly, you get to your 3rd year and you start to do the rotations. For 1 month, you're a surgeon. The next month, you're an OBGYN. The next month, you're a pediatrician. So you kind of get a flavor of everything. I quickly realized that while I enjoyed working with my hands, I didn't enjoy that lifestyle. And I knew I wanted to have a family, and I had interests outside of medicine and work, and I wanted to have the time to invest in those. And so I kind of went back to square one, like, who am I? What do I like? And then kind of through the way I learned, like, I really like psychiatry, that sort of darker side of the human mind and behavior really intrigued me, but it lacked that sort of physical act of what surgery would have brought. And then I found pathology, which was, very cerebral, very kind of thoughtful. You're in the background. You're kind of the doctor's doctor. You're the resource for everyone. When everybody else doesn't know what to do, the pathologist's job is to kind of figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't necessarily love direct patient care. I had a lot of bit of social anxiety at that age growing up. And I didn't like that standing there with a clipboard and then knocking on the patient's room and then walking in and then having to meet person after person,
Right.
and have that conversation. That filled me with just massive amounts of anxiety. And so I knew I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to be a primary care physician. So I thought this was a good fit for me. It balanced all the things that I wanted, but kind of eliminated some of the things that I didn't, and then offered a lifestyle that I think would give me time and to do other things. That's not being a forensic pathologist, though, because pathology is a very broad field. Pathology is defined as the study of disease. And so most pathologists, 99% of them, have nothing to do with autopsies or forensics. So you go and you learn 4 years residency, and you're basically learning, for the most part, to either be a surgical pathologist, which is anytime somebody has a biopsy of a little funny, mark on your skin, or growth in your skin, you have a lump in your breast, you have, mass in your colon on a colonoscopy, the surgeon or the clinician will remove that or biopsy that, and then you're the doctor who looks at it under the microscope and makes a determination. That's about half of pathology. The other half is what we call clinical pathology, where you basically run the laboratory. So anytime they're saying, we're going to do a test, we're going to do a blood test on you, the clinical pathologist oversees that. And so I had to do all of that training as well. And then you get to a point where every pathology resident has to do a month of forensics as part of the overall training. Like I said, well less than 1% of all pathologists are forensic pathologists. If you ask a person in the street, they think every pathologist is a forensic pathologist.
Right.
And so I did my month over here at our coroner's office, and I walked in the door and immediately fell in love with people are ripped in half. And it's like, it was everything that I had grown up through.
Love it.
It manifests right there.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I had always had a really strong interest in public health. And how do you address the social and ills that we have at a population level? And forensics does all of that, right? You're in the trenches as it exists. You're literally covered in blood and shit like every single day.
Mm-hmm.
But then at the end of the day, you're figuring out what happened. You walk into a room, there's a mystery, you solve it.
Mm-hmm.
You walk out of that room and you go and you talk to their family and you tell them what happened. And then by the afternoon, you're at 30,000 feet saying, but now what trends are we seeing in the community? What's happening in our town? This may be different from other towns, or maybe we're also seeing it across the country. What are the emerging threats? What are we dealing with? And then how do I get that information as quickly as possible to the media, to other elected officials, to the public health department, to the people who change and directly influence policy, so that we can keep us in this community safer and healthier, right? And so it runs the full spectrum from immediate sort of gratification all the way up to how do I improve the quality of the life for the people in my community. And it's one of the few jobs in medicine that allows you to do that. And so I decided I had to go on and do a fellowship. I did that at the University of Texas in Dallas, which is one of the top, probably one or two programs in the country to do forensics. Dallas and Texas in general is a pretty violent place. And so forensic pathology is one of those, the fellowships, one of those kind of places where you really want to go to the worst city in America. Not that Dallas is a bad city. I love living in Dallas, but it's like being a trauma surgeon, right?
Gives you the experience.
You want to see the worst things imaginable, the most challenging situations. And then the second you're done, you get the hell out and you go live in a nice community.
Yeah.
Really. But you've been tested under the worst circumstances. And so, no matter what comes at you, you're prepared for it. And so, fortunately for me, when I left here to go do my fellowship, I had been mentored by the coroner here at the time, Dr. Bucks. And so I essentially had a job offer to come back at the completion of my fellowship. So I moved back here in 2008, where I practiced at the coroner's office and through to today.
I like the fact that you decided you walked the walk and you did what you had to do to figure out what your next path was. You were like, I'm not staying put just because it's comfortable. You searched for that goal or what you really wanted to do with your life. And I do appreciate what is the word?
Yeah, he didn't want to settle.
Yeah. And I love that you kept challenging yourself. Like, that's amazing.
Thank you.
So what is, and this was just me kind of like looking into like your background and just questions that would pop up. Like, what are normal questions that people kind of get confused? So what is the difference between a coroner and a medical examiner?
So in the United States, we have a death investigation system that varies from state to state. So when the country was founded way back in the day, we essentially adopted what they had, the death investigation system they had in feudal England. And in England, what would happen is someone would die out in a village or a hamlet, and the king would send, they said, okay, well, somebody died, and so they'd send out a representative of the king to go figure out what happened. And so they'd go out, and their main job was to make sure that they were handing over the titles and the lands and the properties and all of these things appropriately. Part of it wasn't figuring out what happened, but most of it was kind of the bureaucracy of what happens when somebody dies. And that person was the crown's representative or the coroner. And so when the U.S. was founded, we said, well, let's adopt that similar system, but we don't have a king or a queen, so we're going to have to elect these people. And so they started electing the person who does this. And that person became known as the coroner, right? And then as medicine progressed from the 17th to early 1800s into the 1900s, and the criminal justice system became more complex and advanced, somebody along the way on the East Coast in New York said, hey, this is kind of weird that we elect this random person to be in charge of how and why people die when we have these doctors who seem to be like pretty good at it. It's kind of like what they do. So instead of just electing like a random person, why don't we appoint a physician who's trained and specifically figuring out how and why people die? We'll give them all the same powers that the coroner had. But we'll call this a medical examiner system. And we can either have that person be in charge of the whole state, or we can divide up the state into sections or regions and put someone in charge of each one. Various ways we could do it. But that became the medical examiner system. And that happened in the early 1900s, and then predominantly on the East Coast. And then it spread, and more states said, well, that's a good idea. Let's do that. And that spread across the country. And the plan was, as we progressed through the 1900s, that we would essentially phase out the antiquated coroner system. It just didn't make sense in the modern world that we would elect this person. And that was fairly successful until we got to about the 1960s. And then, we're America, so we get distracted. And so we stopped. And so since the 1960s, we've essentially had this patchwork across the country of some states are medical examiners, some states are coroners, some states are a combination of both. And it's just kind of random. Like it's different from state to state. Sometimes it's different from county to county.
Wow.
Inside the U.S. Well, Colorado, where we're all living, is one of the few states that not only is still a coroner system, the original system where you elect this person, but up until recently, there were no meaningful qualifications for who could have that position. You needed to register, you needed to run, you needed to win. But the only requirements were 18 years and above, a registered voter, a non-felon, or a high school diploma or equivalent.
So we could.
Yeah.
We're going to be on the ballot.
Convicted felon, you could be on the ballot. You could be the coroner. It doesn't require any education or training or experience whatsoever. And
sign me up.
Yes, yeah. And so unfortunately, that means pretty much anyone can run. And I can tell you across Colorado, and personally my experience, anybody did run. And so I had 2 elections where I had to run against people who were just painfully and dangerously and honestly comically unqualified to do the job. One ran a marijuana-themed bed and breakfast called Bud Breakfast. And the other person that ran against me was a conspiracy theorist who had no idea what the coroner did, couldn't even tell you. She couldn't tell you what the job was. And so fortunately I won both of those races and moved on. But one of the kind of crowning achievements of my career, at least sort of like bucket list items, was to get this evolved at least a little bit and put some guardrails on it. So back in the spring of 2024, we got a bill passed with the help of a local legislator that essentially set requirements for counties of 150,000 people and above that said, okay, if you're going to be a coroner in a big city, you need to have some qualifications. And so now in those counties, which is predominantly
Damn it, Sam.
Yeah. You have to be a forensic pathologist or a board certified medical legal death investigator. And so for the first time in Colorado history, there are some legitimate requirements for what you could do. So you missed your win.
By a year.
Paranoid Sisters, Coroner's Office.
Podcasting live from the sea. And so, but that's not true in many places still. And so there are challenges with our coroner system, like in El Paso County, because we have a coroner system in Colorado. The vast majority of Colorado counties don't have forensic pathologists as coroners. And so when somebody dies in those counties, those coroners can't do autopsies. They have to send those to a forensic pathologist. And so El Paso County not only does autopsies for Colorado Springs and the surrounding area, but for about 20 other counties. So we would cover about a third of Colorado. We would be responsible for investigating those deaths. And so a state like Texas has a medical examiner system. So they carve up the state into large regions. You got Dallas, you got Fort Worth, you got Houston, you got Austin, you got San Antonio. And you carve up the state and you say, okay, there's an appointed medical examiner, such as myself, in the center of that. And then they funnel the bodies, the deaths to that office. And so in El Paso County, we have, technically we have funding for 6 total medical examiners. Unfortunately, for those young folks out there who are interested in this field, there's a national crisis shortage of forensic pathologists. We only have about, 500 to 600 full-time practicing forensic pathologists. We probably need twice that in the United States. We only graduate in the entire United States of America, who then go past their boards, somewhere around 25 to 30 forensic pathologists a year.
Oh my!
So literally more people are drafted in the first round of the NFL draft. Pathologists.
Wow.
And so it's a very, very needed profession. The downside is it takes a long time to get there, right? So to be a forensic pathologist, it's essentially 4 years of undergrad, it's 4 years of medical school, it's 4 years of residency, and then it's a 1-year fellowship. So it's 13 total years. And so it takes as much time to raise a kindergartner to a high school graduate as it does a high school graduate to become a forensic pathologist. So it's a long road, but it's certainly a wonderful profession.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up because we have some questions later on that kind of talk about if, some of our listeners are interested in this path to become a medical examiner, forensic pathologist. Because again, I think everyone probably that listens to this podcast, because we're all weirdos, has some type of interest in it, but it's interest applying it to actually having the fortitude to do the 13 years.
Yes.
Of education.
You have to be sort of a student scientist first, so then you have to be a physician second, and then you have to be a pathologist third, and then you finally get to the point where you have to be a forensic pathologist. So it's a long way, but you can't do this job. It's one of the unique fields of medicine. Most of medicine, as you advance, you start out broad, right? As a medicine, you learn everything, and then you sort of funnel into your area of expertise. And so it's more in depth. You're learning more in that area, but you're also eliminating a large part of what your practice is. If you're an orthopedic surgeon, your life is predominantly focused on just a few things, very complicated, very challenging things, but you don't have to worry about a lot of the other ones. And that's not true of forensics. As you advance, it actually, you have to remember all that. I don't get to forget what it's like to deliver a baby or how I don't get to forget what it's like to be a pediatrician and take care of kids or elderly people. But what really happens is it actually broadens and gets deeper. And then you get to the point where you go from pathologist to forensics, and then it just explodes because then you have to know ballistics and firearms and trace evidence and DNA and criminal justice and investigation and all of these other things, of which no other physician has to worry about that at all. Nobody else has to deal with this. And so it does open you up to this whole new area of expertise and experience, and it makes it really, really challenging. You don't get to forget anything. You have to be able to access all of that. But that's also what makes it an incredibly exciting job, is because every day you have no idea what's going to come in. One day you're dealing with, a new drug that's on the street, right? And then the next day it's a plane crash. You have to work with the National Transportation Safety Board. And the next day, 2 trains collided, and you got to figure out, well, how's the train yard work? And you have these brilliant people that are helping you figure all this out, but it never stops. You never stop being challenged. Exciting.
That kind of actually brings us to the next question of how do you work in collaboration with law enforcement, attorneys, or medical professionals? You even said the transportation.
Yeah. Well, who would have thought, right? Who puts those in the same bucket to be oh, the medical examiner is going to work with the head of transportation.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, if you listen, the coolest things about this job, which is a lot of cool stuff, but one of the coolest things is you get to work with the most amazing, like badass people that exist. Like, I don't want to be, ragging on dentists again, but there's a reason why there's 500 shows about forensic pathologists and not one about a dentist, like not one.
Unless they're a murderer.
Unless
and then a true crime documentary. You just did that.
Yeah.
Oh, we did. We did a couple episodes ago, guys, if you haven't listened.
So you're working with like all of these people that they make movies and TVs about, right? And so you're working with cops and homicide detectives and fire department, all the first responders. You're working with DAs and public defenders, and then you're working with the public health officials, and you're working with these federal agencies and state agencies, and all these really, really cool people who are just like the best of the best at their jobs. And not only that, but they're the best at their jobs under the most challenging of circumstances. Like these are people who handle crises. Like that's the part that's cool. When the shit hits the fan, like these are the people that show up, which makes it really cool to be in a room with them and like work with them and figure it out. And that's one of the things I've learned. I mean, I during the pandemic, one of my responsibilities was the county came and said, well, you're the only physician that works for the county. Would you help us manage like the local COVID response, right? And there was no playbook for that. No one's like, okay, here's what everyone's supposed to do.
Yeah.
You're learning in real time. And it was I always compare it to like Apollo 13, right? Where the like, we got to get these guys home. And they're like, let's get the smartest people in a room together. And we got a duct tape and a dryer hose. Put it on the table, and you're like, fucking figure it out.
Yeah.
And that's a lot of what we do. It's just, you can't prepare for everything. And so you just have to have really smart people who are committed to doing the job. And so that's one of the things that I have loved and still love about this position is being able to work with those awesome people. And you never really know, like there was a day we had a parachute, the guy jumped out of a plane and parachute didn't open. And you're like, I don't know shit about parachute, right? And so we end up getting the Fort Carson, the parachute paratroopers. One of them came in. He's like, yeah, I'm a master, chute packer or whatever. And so he sits there and we sit there and we all stand around and we watch him and he unpacks it and he knows immediately, like, here's what got fucked up. Like, here's what went wrong. Here's why I wasn't packed properly. Here's why I didn't deploy when they pulled the ripcord. Who else gets to do that? Like, that's cool shit. Yeah. And then the next day it's going to be someone else. And just,
right. And that's why I would never jump out of a plane, because if you don't have the master chute, what is it, packer?
Yeah, whatever. I don't know. He's whatever.
Then I don't want to go.
All about that time. I was chute packer, but
yes, that could be really.
Yeah.
So now we're going to kind of go into like the day in the life of a medical examiner, forensic pathologist. So can you walk us through just like a regular day? And I know you said that you never know what you're going to walk into day to day, but like just a kind of like a, let's say, typical day.
Yeah. So a typical day starts actually kind of the evening before. And so we have, unlike what you see on television, it's a whole team of people that are doing this job, right? The medical examiner is not banging on people's doors and kicking in doors and getting people to confess to crime. Like that's not how it works. Mm-hmm. So it takes a whole group of people. And so we've got death investigators, what we're called medical legal death investigators, who these are folks who generally have an undergraduate degree and oftentimes a master's degree in forensic science. And so they're on call. And the way the shift worked for here, they're on 24 hours, a 24-hour shift. And a death occurs, somebody dies at home, their family calls 911, first responders show up, law enforcement officers going to show up. They pronounce the person dead. And dispatch will then call the coroner's office and say, we've got a death reported at this location. Give a little bit of the details, multiple gunshot wounds, found hanging in their garage, found dead in bed, whatever the channel is. The death investigator will go and talk to law enforcement who responded, maybe talk to paramedics or first responders if they're still there, if it's relevant, and then maybe talk to the family or the witnesses or whoever was there. If they're home dead alone, they'll start investigating and they'll look for, what medication do they have? And they'll find out from that, who their doctor is. And they'll know what medical problems they have based off what they're being prescribed. And they'll start to look kind of through their house and look at the body and start to get a general picture of what happened here. And then they'll reach out to the physician and say, it's the medical history here. And they may say, yeah, Mr. Smith, he's been really sick for a while. He's got congestive heart failure. This wasn't unexpected. We are at the scene. We don't see any injuries. We don't see any signs of a struggle. We don't see any drugs or drug paraphernalia. Clearly, this looks like a natural death. He's 72 years old. And his wife, he's dead in bed next to his wife. And, he's complaining of not feeling well the day before. And so it's very clear kind of what happened. We've ruled out the bad stuff. And that body will be released oftentimes directly to the funeral home from the residence, right? In another case, they're found deceased and they're in a bathroom and they've got a gunshot wound to the head. Suicide note, right? And so we will also get their psychiatric records and we'll track all that down, but that case is going to require an autopsy. And so all of that is happening 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. And in a busy office like, Denver and Colorado Springs, it's pretty much constant. And so we have several of those investigators who are in the evening, about 9 o'clock, between 9 and 10, generally there's a text message that comes through to the entire staff, to all the medical examiners saying, here are the number of cases that we have for tomorrow. And here's a brief description of those. 32-year-old male, homeless, found dead in his tent. A 16-year-old, found dead, hanging in his bedroom closet. 65-year-old visiting from Oklahoma, no PCP in Colorado, so probably requires an external exam or whatever. And this could be anywhere from a couple of cases up to 10, 12, 14 cases in a day. And so the day begins the next morning when we arrive. Generally, the morgue techs, the people who are going to physically help us do the autopsy, they get there around 6:30, 7 o'clock. They start prepping the bodies. The doctors get there generally 7:30 a.m. And we read through the investigative narrative so we kind of know what's going on with this person and make a determination as to whether they need an autopsy or not and to what level of autopsy that they require. And then we proceed one at a time doing the autopsies. Now, a busy office like El Paso County, we have a couple of morgues. We can do upwards of 4 autopsies at the same time simultaneously. And so there may be multiple doctors working on that day. Doing autopsies, and you work from one to the next. You weigh the body, you photograph the body, you collect evidence, you open the body, you take each organ out, you weigh each one, you examine them for injuries or disease, anything that could help could be responsible as cause or contribute. You collect blood, body fluids along the way. You're going to run toxicology on those, looking for drugs or poisons, anything that could have caused or contributed to death, and then documenting all that, with photography if that's necessary and appropriate. And depending on the case, right? And at the end, you compile all of that information into the autopsy report. Generally, you're out of the morgue by noon or early afternoon. That gives you time to dictate the cases, to take the notes and turn them into a written report. And then it gives the morgue staff time to clean up and start to release bodies that funeral homes are coming to pick up. And then they go out the door. And then the kind of things are wrapped up generally by, a normal work day, 4, 5 o'clock, depending. Keeping in mind that, the operation is essentially 24 hours a day when it comes to the investigation of deaths. And we do that. El Paso County works 6 days a week. And we have Sundays off. We don't do staffing, but, deaths occur. So the investigators still work there, but we don't generally do autopsies there unless it's a really big emergency. And that's it. And so, you'll spend your afternoon oftentimes dictating the cases, but also calling the families and talking to them and letting them know what you found at autopsy, answering their questions. And this is the part that often people don't think about, which is, when you're a physician, you just autopsied someone's loved one. This is, by definition, one of the most traumatic things that's ever happened to this person, right? You don't come to the coroner's office or the medical examiner's office if it's an expected death. It's not grandma with metastatic breast cancer who's in hospice. They're not coming to us.
Right.
These are young people who died sudden, unexpectedly, or of something violent, right? These are people who shouldn't be dead,
Right.
But they are. And so this is like a bomb got dropped off in these people's lives. And so you call them and they're grieving and their loved ones died within hours to a day. And you're helping them come to grips with what's happened. You're sort of shuttling them through those first steps of grief. So sometimes often very dramatic grief.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes these people are coming, the decedents, the people who have died, are coming from maybe families or circumstances where, they're dead of drugs and they've come from an environment in which there's a lot of drugs or abuse or neglect or untreated mental health issues. And so you're maybe talking to people that aren't in the healthiest place,
Mm-hmm.
don't have the tools to operate under normal stress. And now you've dropped this stress on them. And so it's your responsibility to help them through this process, get their questions answered and help shuttle them towards the first steps of healing, which is like to coming to terms with what happened, getting their question asked, understanding it. And a lot of these cases, there it is. If it's a suicide, there are a lot of like feelings of responsibility or maybe even shame or what could I have done differently? Is this I should have reached out to them. And so a lot of that, while they're decedent, I'm their doctor too. I'm not talking to them. I am also at that moment essentially the doctor for their family.
Right.
I'm helping them through this process. And that can be incredibly challenging but also incredibly rewarding as well. I mean, my mantra is we don't do autopsies for the dead, right? They're dead. They don't know. They don't care. Like one of two things is happening here. Either there's an afterlife and they've moved on to something better, or there's not and they don't ever know. Either way, they don't give a shit.
Right.
Either way, it makes no difference to them. And so really why we do autopsies is for the living, right? We do it to help the families come to terms with what's happened. We do it so that we can keep the rest of us safe. If there's something that's harming them, or if there's something happening in the world that's dangerous. And we do them so because those are the first steps towards figuring out what went wrong so we can ultimately address that so the same thing doesn't happen to other people. And so you were really the doctor for their family. You're a doctor for the dead person, you're the doctor for their family, and you're a doctor for the whole community because you're also helping the broader community come to terms with what happened, particularly in things like mass shootings or big events that traumatize everybody. Or right now, as we're recording this, there's a massive wildfire that's destroying like a great American city. And that's not unique to them. We've also had those same things here. And so you're also there to help a community come to terms with it.
No, I think that's the broader picture that you were just talking about. Another thing that people don't think about when it comes to the job, right? Like and I guess we don't look at it the same way, right? Because we're literally just picturing like somebody on the table, you're cutting them open, taking out organs, like the same things you see on TV. So
you walk in the room, I'm eating a sandwich, do the autopsy. Somebody make a few, wisecracks, death-related puns, and tell somebody why they're dead, and that's it.
I was thinking, like, have you seen the autopsy of Jane Doe?
Many times, yes.
That's such a good one, and that's what I was thinking of. But that's what I was kind of like.
Good one, yeah. It's one of the ones that they did a really nice job. When you do this for a living, you can suspend sort of disbelief a little bit. You just roll on for the ride as well, but you do notice when they do a good job, and they've done their research. And then other times you watch something all you had to do is just
ask somebody.
And you could have made this a better movie.
Yeah.
I do like that mantra though of, the autopsies are for the living, not really for the dead. So the facts, the information, or just kind of closure. Yeah, the closure of it all. This is kind of more of a fun question, I guess. What are the smells, sounds, or details of the morgue environment that people wouldn't expect?
Yeah, so it's people see, a lot of young kids, high school and college will say, oh, I want to be a forensic pathologist. And like, oh, that's cool. Like, that's awesome. We need more forensic pathologists. That's wonderful. But what do you actually know about it beyond like what you see on TV? All right. And that gets to the senses of it, which is you can watch something on TV and like, oh, I can handle that. But until you're in the room and you smell the bodies and you see the blood and you hear the saw and you have to touch them, it's you don't know if you could do it or not. And it's not a job for everyone. It's not a job for the vast majority of people. And so many times I taught at UCCS here for over a decade. And so we had summer internships, and probably once a summer I'd have an intern who'd come through and they'd want to spend their whole summer with us in the morgue. And day one, they're like, I can't do it. Like, I can't.
I could see that.
It's too traumatic. It's too difficult. I can't touch them. And you're like, they're dead. They're not going to hurt you. But they just can't. They can't do it. And I would have about 40 students every semester, and they'd have to come and watch a couple autopsies. And every semester, I'd have 2 or 3 of them would pass out, hit the floor.
No. I thought you were going to say drop out of the class.
So they dropped, but they hit the floor.
We had someone apply for a position one time, and she comes in, seemed very smart, had never seen autopsies before. I'm doing an autopsy, so it's the job interview, so we're there to see if they can handle it. And she's just standing there watching, and I look over and she passes out, she falls down, she hits the floor, urinates.
Oh my God.
Starts to seize. You get her kind of calmed down, you get her welcomed back up. Clearly she's wet through her pants. You stand her back up, put her in a chair. She's like, no, I'm good. I can stay. I want to stay. And then I'm on autopsy. I look over at her and I see her start to go unconscious again. I'm like, you got to get her out of here. Like, this isn't it.
She was about to end up on your table.
Yeah. And so they take her out, and as she's leaving, semi-conscious, she's like, I hope I get the job. And you're like, I don't know, you passed out twice, you had a seizure, you pissed yourself. Like, I don't know how a job interview could have gone.
I don't think it could have.
You're going to be super successful. You're driven. You're clearly, you have perseverance. That's awesome, but not
in this field.
Not in this field. And so, it's a full scale onslaught of all your senses at the same time. And it is challenging, when we have a lot of visitors come through, we have a lot of students come through, and there's no way to sugarcoat it. Like, it is what it is. And I always tell people, have you seen the first 20 minutes of Saving Private Ryan? Like, that's what it is. Like, you walk through the door and it saws, and there's blood everywhere, and it's flying, and people are yelling over the saw, and there's multiple bodies out, and there's organs all over the place, and there's blood all over the floor, and it's organized chaos. But from someone who's never seen it before, it's like a tidal wave of emotions that come over people when they first walk in the room. It's better when you can bring them in and you haven't started yet, and you can kind of work them up through it, but that's not always possible. So sometimes a student comes and a group or a tour comes and they want to see, and you open the door and it's like a slaughter happens, right? And so that's the part you have to work your way through. Now, in medical school, you start out with a cadaver that's fixed, and you spend 100 hours with the cadaver working through it. And then you kind of advance then, and later on, if you do, cadaver are treated with chemicals. They don't smell like human beings. They smell like chemicals. And so it's immediately easy to detach yourself from that's a real person. It looks like a Ianatoth model. What we're doing are people sometimes that are still warm. And so it's much more difficult to disassociate what you're doing. You eventually get there, but it is hard immediately. They look very much alive. And so you as you progress through your training, you kind of work your way up. And then once you get to doing a month of, let's say, forensics, that's when you get to the point where you start to see the decomposed bodies and the maggots, all the stuff that you see on your Silence of the Lambs and True Detectives and your sort of hardcore kind of horror stuff. But until you're face to face, with an advanced decomposing body, and everybody knows you go for a walk or a run or whatever, and you smell a dead animal. It's a raccoon on the side of the road. It's that smell, but it's like, let's imagine like 150 dead raccoons in a closed space, right? And so it can be incredibly powerful. And you see, TV shows where they rub stuff. Like we would shame you if you showed up with
amateurs
with like Vicks Vapor Rub under your nose. Like this is like a badge of honor that you just it can't hurt you. It doesn't hurt you. It's not harmful in any way. It's a sort of reptilian basic level human response of something bad happened here. I shouldn't be here. But you can train yourself to get over it. And to be honest with you, I don't even notice it. I mean, I'm aware that it's like, oh, this doesn't smell great. But I always tell people, the more you fight it, the harder it's going to be for you. You just breathe normal. But if you're like all the time, like trying to put like 5 masks on to like, I'm like, it's not going to work. It's like, you're just going to be miserable. And so you just accept it and you embrace the smell and you move on with your life.
Embrace the smell.
What you see on TV of like someone, just one person laid out on the metal table, it's probably not as normal like what you see with one person. It's multiple.
So it depends. Like if you're in an office, there are other counties that I work for that they just don't have the volume, and so you do one at a time. But a big office, a big city, Colorado Springs, Denver, any major metropolitan area, there's too many deaths. So you have, like in Dallas, I think we had like 10 tables, and so you could do like 10 autopsies at once. And I think we had 11 or 12 medical examiners. And so it's like, it's like Santa's little workshop, except of it. But you're efficient, and I could have 10 autopsies. I could go the whole day, do all 10 of it. And I could probably never say a word because my staff knows exactly what I need, exactly when I need it. These are freaking professionals, and they are the most well-oiled. It's like watching a pit crew at a NASCAR work over and over and over and over again. You wheel the body up, you do those stuff, take all the organs out, you clean it up, put it back, it goes back in the cooler, and it's ready to go. And you can do an autopsy in, a straightforward case in 30 minutes. from opening the bag to closing the bag. If everybody is really, really good at what they're doing.
Okay, nice. Well, that description did not disappoint. I will let you know that. But we had another question, but you kind of already went into it on like how you ever get like desensitized to some of it. And you kind of went into it with like, you just kind of get over it. You know, it's a badge of honor.
The smell.
That stuff's pretty easy. I mean, there's lots of jobs that are stinky jobs, right? There are a lot of people that do
being a parent is one of them.
Exactly. You're not going to see anything in our office. You're not going to see it at home. You're going to see that shit, blood. You're going to see all the same stuff. It's a little more intense, but our job, but same stuff. So generally, I know if somebody walks in and they're clearly a mom or of mom's age, I'm not worried about them. Like they're not going to pass out. It's the 21-year-old dude who isn't a parent, has never seen these things. I'm like, that's the guy that's going to hit the fucking crowd.
Yeah.
And I have this whole spiel that I give before everybody comes in, and I'm like, here's what you're going to do. You're going to stand next to somebody else. You're going to, if you feel lightheaded, if you feel flushed, if you feel nauseous, if you feel anything other than stone cold normal, here's what you're going to do. You're going to turn to the person next to you and say, I don't feel good. And that person is going to link their arm underneath your elbow, like underneath your arm, and someone else is going to help them. They're going to walk you out. I'm like, here's what you're not going to, I'm going to push through. I'm embarrassed. I don't want to say anything. You're not going to be like, I'm a hero. I'm going to look up and I'm going to think about my happy place. Like that is not going to work. Pass out and you're going to fall face first. I had one time a student, I was doing a death and it was a aortic aneurysm. So there was a bunch of blood in the chest, and I was working at about 10 students who were kind of semicircular, kind of around the table. And I invite them up. I mean, you get as close as you want, but no, if you get close, there's a chance you're going to get blood on you, and it's still wired. That's fine. And so, there's various students who like, I want to see closer. And so I'm doing the autopsy. I'm like kind of over the chest, like looking at the heart, trying to find out where this thing is ruptured. And I feel someone like come up next to me, and I'm like, okay, cool. Student wants to see. And so I'm doing the thing. And then I feel like kind of lean in, and they kind of lean up against me. I'm like, wow, they're really into this. And I'm not like, I've got a scalpel and forceps in the other hand. So I'm like focused. And then all of a sudden I kind of look to my left, and it's a
He's just
student,
passed out.
female student, face first, right into the open. Right.
Oh my.
Where they fall face first into like a pie,
Oh.
Face first. I throw the scalpel down. I reach up. I'm covered in blood. So then I grab her and pull her up. And then the vortex realized what's happening. So then they grab her and we lay her down. She got blood all
I was not expecting that.
over her face. These are all like undergraduates, like 19 years old. And the looks on their faces are the funniest shit I've ever seen. Their eyes are like the size of like coffee, saucers. And they're like, oh my God, like did that just...
Everyone just froze.
Everyone just freezes. And so we get her down. We have these like antiseptic, like commercial grade wipes that we use. And so we wipe her face off, and then it comes through, swing down now. And what happened? You're explaining, you're fine, you're okay. Because she didn't hit her head, which is a good thing. And then we finally get her up, and then we get her out of the room, and then you go to kind of lay her down. There's a spot where we can lay people down. This happens not infrequently. So we have assistants.
So you just have a place just to lay people.
And so we do that, and then the rest. So like, how do you carry on after that? So then I come back in, and I'm like a little bit frustrated because I'm like, I gave you the spiel, like what you're supposed to do.
That was gonna be my next question. Of like, you're like, oh, again, like
God. And so we finish out, and then I have to. Then the next week at class, I have to like address it, and so we're students are in the lecture hall, and I'm like, okay, well, I know you don't want to embarrass someone, you don't make it worse, and you're like, here's what we need to talk about again. We had an incident. But at the same time, I mean, I give lots of speeches, lots of lectures, I testify a lot. 4 times in my career, I've sent people to the hospital just by talking and explaining stuff. Twice in a lecture hall at UCCS. Both times the kid fell and hit their heads, and the ambulance had to come. One time on the stand testifying, I had to jump out of the jury box and run over to help a juror who was now unconscious and seizing from the vasovagal Paso. I was explaining strangulation and blood flow and all that stuff. And then the ambulance had to come, and the judge was there, and they had to evacuate the courtroom. And then the judge called 911, and they were like, okay, it's okay. Dr. Kelly's here. And they're like, Dr. Kelly. And they're like, yeah, Dr. Kelly's on. No, don't tell him Dr. Kelly's here with them. They'll think he's
dead.
Dr. Kelly is here. Then this is worst case scenario. And because I work with all the first responders, so they all kind of know who Dr. Kelly is and what that means when I'm involved. And then the last time was actually at a dinner party for my sister. And I had a guy who was bragging about how he active duty and I've seen it all and there's nothing you're going to say. And I'm telling a story about this case that I had. And all of a sudden my sister's yelling from the other room, like, so-and-so passed out in the kitchen. And I go in there and sure enough, this dude's passed out.
It's always
You're going to have to save that story for us later because...
yeah. And fire department had to come.
Oh, wow.
I was at my sister's house. She was looking at her party and I was with my brother was there too. All three siblings were there. And my parents weren't there. And so my brother, my parents knew my sister was hosting this dinner party. And my brother takes a picture of the guy getting pushed into the ambulance. Not of the guy, but you can see him on the cot, like going in. And then he just texts my parents, this could have gone better. He doesn't respond after that.
Oh, no.
My poor parents are like, all three of our kids are at this dinner party and there's clearly an ambulance. They're loading someone up into it. So they had no idea what had happened. But I'm a dangerous person.
You're like, damn it, Leon.
Yeah.
Not again.
To the point where I know what will set people off. There are slides that I've taken out of presentations that I know will do it. And there's something about seeing blood dripping that gets people. So one of the students I've had pass out, we were doing an autopsy, we had opened it up. We kind of make the wide incision, you open up, and so the skin and the fat are kind of flapped open. Well, there's too much blood in there, it'll leak out. And if one of the flaps is over the side of the table, it'll drip down to the floor. And it drips, just like you would imagine, like rain drip, 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 drip. But it's bright red blood on a white concrete floor. And I'm seeing it, and I notice, I look down, I look at it, and it's drip, drip, but it's making this sort of beautiful, like, cool, and almost like an ASMR video. It's like, drop blood, right? And it's pooling and pooling. And then I look and I go, and then I turn and I see one of the students and you just see it like, catch her, she's going down. Because there's something about seeing that blood, like that bright red blood against white background, what does people in.
Yeah. Kind of like our logo.
Kind of like your logo.
So I'm like, you are so our people right now. Because like as you're telling the stories, like you're talking about people like passing out, just telling the stories, like we would be like leading and be like, we need all the details. Yeah. I can't vouch for us on like in a real scenario, but the stories we love.
Yeah.
What are the most critical tools or just tools in general that you use when conducting an autopsy?
The bodies are on a cot, like a cart, a metal cart, and there's stations and they get wheeled feet first into the station. And at that station, we have like, a knife, like a big, there's different kinds of knives. I prefer like the classic sort of chef's knives, like the big Michael Myers knife. We have knives that have like rounded ends. I call them like the safety scissors of knives. So I use the old school one, but other people like the rounded sort of safety one. Then we have a scalpel and we have forceps. We have, a ruler. We have all those kinds of things. It's not, when people come to watch, I say it's a lot like working at Benihana's, where you're like, you're a chef and while everyone's sitting around watching you like cut up.
I will never see Benihana as the same again.
And so it is not indifferent than what a chef's job is. The end product is very different. But I'm very good at dismembering things and taking stuff apart and using sort of chef's tools. We have to open the head, you have a bone saw. Which is kind of so it's a saw that kind of vibrates back and forth. One of the things that you'll see in horror movies is that a bone saw is very scary looking, but it's not dangerous in any way. It moves back and forth, and so you can take the blade and literally put it on your skin and run it, and it just makes your skin move back and forth. The only reason it cuts bone is because bone doesn't move, and so when you push it against bone, it will actually saw into the bone. So you literally couldn't kill someone with a bone saw unless you like beat them to death with it. But you'll see that a lot of times in movies.
I have seen that before.
It would cut anything. If you could put it on your hand while doing it. And that makes sense, right? Because we're holding, it's hard. None of us would have fingers left if the handsaw was actually sharp. And then one of the things that we use that people don't realize is that you make a wide incision on the chest, you open it up, you peel the skin back. But now you've got ribs that you have to get open. And so one of the things that the thing that we use to get those open is essentially hedge clippers that you buy at Lowe's that you would use to trim like your little branches on your tree. And you hook it under there and you close it and you just do kind of a couple of ribs at a time and you do it on the other side. And so when we have people come and visit, they're like, I can't believe you're using just like
normal tool.
Yeah, to do this. And you're like, yeah, you could buy this one for $30. It works great. Or you could buy a medical grade one for $1,000 and they won't do any better.
Yeah, it does the same thing.
Same thing. So that's the tool that people are always kind of surprised by that we have. And it does make kind of an unpleasant crunching sound when you're using it that can sometimes disturb people. The other thing that really gets people is that we collect blood and we collect urine. But the other thing that we collect is fluid in the eye. It's called vitreous fluid. And the reason we use that is because it's a fluid that is kind of sequestered away from the rest of the body. And so we can use it to determine levels of alcohol, as well as some other drugs and things. And we also can use it to determine things like dehydration or diabetes, because you can't really use blood after death to do a lot of these testing. The person's dead, so the levels are going to be abnormal. And so we take a needle and then we stick it into the eye and we pull the fluid out. And that's the clippers on the chest and then the needle in the eye are the two things that if someone hasn't seen an autopsy before, they're often shocked by, because there's just something sort of primal, uncomfortable about the thought of a needle in someone's eye, which is why that's a common horror movie trope.
That or an ear.
Yeah, or the ear. And so those are the two big things. Now we have a really amazing full body X-ray scanner that we use that scans the body from head to toe, kind of like the scanner in the Arnold Schwarzenegger movie Total
Recall. Yeah.
That scans the body head to toe in about 20 seconds and then laterally about 20 seconds. And then that gets projected up on a big TV in the round. So we're able to see bullets or broken bones or things like that. And the rest of it's a lot of normal stuff that you would see at any other office. In fact, half of the building is just normal offices. You would never know it was anything but be the DMV for all you know, except a lot of the posters are horror movies and skulls and things like that. When you'd think it was Halloween all year round. And then once you pass through a door, then the laboratory side becomes very clear that it's what the work is that's happening in that area.
Just what do you wear normally? Is it just like scrubs, and then do you have like a hard mask on? Like, what do you?
Yeah, so I'm a little bit old school, so I wear scrubs. I have morgue shoes, sort of black sort of slip-on mules that have. They used to be black with skulls on them, but now they're almost white because they're covered in like literally 17 years of blood and brains and goo. So they're. In fact, a reporter one time, I think, come from the Denver Post, came down and I was wearing them because I wear my regular. It's a little bit like Mr. Rogers. I take those shoes off when I get, because I don't want to track those shoes out into the rest of the building. And so he saw me put them on, and he's like, "What is on your shoes?" And I told him what they were. He's like, "Can I take a picture of that?" I'm like, "Yeah, take a picture of them." The Post didn't allow him to put that in the paper, but it made for a cool picture. And then so I wear scrubs and those shoes, and then generally I have like a sweatshirt that I wear, like a long sleeve shirt that I wear when I'm doing the external before we open the body. And then that comes off, and then I put on a semi-waterproof gown, 2 pairs of gloves. We have these mesh, they're almost like chain mail. You can wear gloves on the hand that you don't have the knife in, the holding hand, the hand that you would be holding the organs with. I'm called a cut glove. And that cut glove will protect you from if you slip. I don't wear one. I've never worn one. I find them very cumbersome, and so I just roll with it. And wear 2 gloves in case something does go through. You got a second layer of protection there. And then I generally don't wear a mask. I don't have any hair, so I don't really wear a hairnet. And if we have a case that's suspected like meningitis or infectious disease case, then I will put the mask on. But you're in there for so many hours, and it's really hot. My glasses fog up and I can't see anything. And other folks will wear a mask, some will, and then some will wear a shield. Some have mask and a shield that are one piece. And then if we are in something really bad, like something super infectious,
Like HIV.
Well, no, HIV we pretty much do all the time. Like HIV, things that aren't bloodborne, they're airborne, we're not super worried about. You'd have to have a needle stick, but things that are like a hantavirus case, someone's covered in, your only time you're aerosolizing things is when you're using the bone saw and
that's okay.
Cloud of sort of dust that you can breathe in. And so when we have those cases, we will put on the full, we call them bunny suits, but they're the ones you see on TV, the big white full body suit. We don't use respirators or anything. We just use N95s in case it's worried. But there are times where you get into a case and you don't realize what it is, and then you open the head and you realize quickly it's meningitis, and then everyone screams and runs, and then we all run and put masks on like after the fact, which is probably not the best approach. But those unfortunately are not super common.
What's the most unusual or challenging case that you've ever worked on, and how did you solve it?
Oh man, so there's different, I guess, approaches or different definitions, I suppose, of challenging. So, those ones that are emotionally challenging, that are difficult to get through, and I'm sure we'll probably get to some of those questions later. But and then there's the ones that are sort of intellectually challenging, where it is truly a mystery. Most of what we do, it's not tough. Like they were in a car, they crashed that car, then they were in a road, and their brains are coming out. Like, and no one's gonna be like, oh my God, what happened here?
Yeah.
Sometimes the job can be pretty easy. But then there are other times where it truly is a mystery. Somebody found in a field, doesn't make sense. Someone's found shot. Is it a suicide? Is it a homicide? Circumstances don't quite add up. And so there are those. And so those are generally kind of the hardest ones to sort out, are when you have a couple different possible explanations for what happened, right? And so that would typically be, you've got a woman who's dead from a gunshot wound to the head, right? But there's a history of domestic violence. The husband/boyfriend's story isn't quite adding up. Some of it's a little funky, but it's not clear. It matches most of what you'd expect with suicide, except there's a couple things that just don't make sense. Those are the ones that can be incredibly challenging. But then you have the ones that are like, I had a woman one time that she'd been missing for 10 years. They find there's a man who they believe is responsible, but they've never been able to quite figure it out. And he ends up committing another crime, is arrested, charged with that. Part of his plea deal is, okay, I'll tell you what happened. But the ex-girlfriend, they end up finding her. He tells them she's in an oil drum dropped in a lake in Arizona. So the FBI spends a significant amount of time diving. They do bring up several drums. We open the drum, scoop it out. There's nothing in it. Eventually, they do find a drum. They bring it up. We open it. I scoop my hand in. I pull up, and there's fragments of skull.
Oh, wow.
It's probably her. And so then you're going to spend, 3, 4, 5 hours sifting through. I find a bunch of crawfish. I find it's been in a lake for 2 years. And you're sifting through it, finding small little pieces of bone to try to do DNA on, to confirm that it's her, right? And then all you're left with is quarter-sized pieces of fragments of bone, of which you eventually match through DNA that it's her. And then how do you figure out how she died? So you have to kind of work your way through that, sort of use best logic. So those are things. And then you have, high-profile things, the Club Q shooting that we had here, where you're just dealing with a large number of cases that are coming to you. And probably the most challenging case of my entire career was the return to nature. The incident in Fremont County, where we brought in essentially 190 bodies, decomposing bodies, in the course of about a week, and worked our way through trying to identify all.
Yeah, that is just outrageous and after you said that, I'm like, I can't believe that came through you guys, because we did that story and I was just appalled by what happened there.
It was so we Fremont County is one of the counties that we cover, and so the Fremont County Coroner is an excellent. He's probably one of our best non-physician coroners in Colorado. He does an awesome job, and we've supported him through the years. And when this call came through, that I knew earlier in the week, long before, several days before it hit the media, that there was probably a raid happening on a funeral down there. There was concerns about how the bodies were being stored, and we might be dealing with a lot. And then by the end of the week, it was clear that we were dealing with a lot, and far more than what was being reported in the media, just because there were challenges with how to even count, right? And then so I spent that whole weekend organizing with Randy and state mass fatality team, and then the FBI, and organizing all of that. We basically had to build a mobile morgue and storage facility on site by Monday, when the FBI forensic identification team flew in, and then set up what was essentially one of the largest human recovery efforts, certainly in Colorado, but in the country. And so that's what we train for those things. We train for plane crashes. We train for terrorist events. We train for biohazard type stuff. We train for train wreck. Nobody ever did a tabletop exercise where we trained for 190 decomposing.
Right.
It's like,
you
can't even conceive that that's going to happen. But all the training that you did do for these other things, with a little bit of tweaking, you can essentially apply conceptually to what you need to do.
Mm-hmm.
And by Monday afternoon, and we were up and running, I think Tuesday morning, the body started to arrive. And within a week, we had it all done. We worked 7 days. We worked probably 15, 16-hour days. And within a week, we had every single one of those cases autopsied and documented and stored. And you know, the Family Assistance Center was operating, and we just started working the way down the list.
That's insane. So you autopsied all of those bodies.
Every single one of them got examined.
In a week.
A lot of I mean, the goal was to identify them. And so we could use a combination of fingerprints, DNA, dental, surgical hardware. Like when you have a hip replacement, there are serial numbers on there. And so we are able to figure out if we can narrow down who we think it might be. We're able to use that to identify them, tattoos, like every conceivable identification technique we deployed, sometimes multiple, to get those people identified and back to their family.
I mean, when you have all those bodies come into your guys' office, what do you do with the other bodies or other people that need autopsies? So
what we had to do is, I was in charge. So what I did was we created one whole side of the building was dedicated to this process, return to nature. And they would come in, they'd get tagged and labeled and identified with our new number. They'd go to the FBI, who were set up in one of our auxiliary morgues, who would do the fingerprints. And this team was literally the best in the world at getting fingerprints on bodies that nobody else would be able to do. And they're the FBI, so they have the ability to search databases that a state agency or a county agency would be able to search. But they were amazing to work with. And then they would come out, and then they would get examined and documented and photographed, and we would continue. And so some of them, the fingerprints would pop. We'd figure out who they were. Many of them, they wouldn't. And so then we'd have to do the exam to sort it out. Do they have hardware? What do their teeth look like? Do they have tattoos? Some of them had identification on them because they'd been in the hospital. They'd already been to our office and examined. And so they had our tags still.
Oh, wow.
They had come through and gone. I mean, they were at the funeral home, so they were at the last step. So they'd gone through the process of screening and autopsy if they needed and all of that. So many of them were already documented. So we had all these resources kind of at our disposal to sort that out. And then, so all while that was happening, basically what I did was then I took over the entire normal process of because people didn't stop dying because of and we were still responsible for, Fremont County, while they were doing this, they also had people die of other stuff.
Yeah.
And we certainly had people die of other stuff, and all the other counties had people die of other stuff. And so I basically ran our board myself. I did all the cases that week with a team of staff that got dedicated. And then I would rotate the other doctors through on like 3-hour shifts so they could work very intensely, optimize and efficiently, and then get out and kind of get a mental break. And then the next doctor and the next group would kind of come in and do it so that you could kind of plug them in. And then you could run 12, 14-hour day shifts because you kind of broke it up like that. And then I just covered everything else that came through the door, which is normally the responsibility of 5 doctors. Fortunately, it ended up being we got very, very lucky. We had no homicides that week, and we had a relatively light workflow, so the universe did us a solid there a little bit. But to your point, like, it didn't stop. Right. We still had to get the work done. And that was a big thing. The media kept asking, like, how is this going to impact El Paso County system? Like, I assure you, there won't be any disruption in our normal services, and there wasn't. I got every autopsy done that day, same as I would under normal circumstances. So there was no negative impact on our citizens at all.
Yeah, so like you said, it's a well-oiled machine. Everyone knows exactly what they're supposed to do, even with, the FBI and everyone else kind of in the mix. You guys still function the same way. For a little bit of context for our listeners too, if you haven't, we did the Return to Nature case. So if you want to go back and listen to that episode, it is on Spotify.
Definitely a lot of swearing in that episode. We were hot. We were pissed.
I was so mad.
Yeah, it's a very, I do the job, so I can kind of detach it, but that was hard. That broke a lot of people's hearts. That was really sad.
Yeah. So one of the questions, and we kind of just talked about the Return to Nature being that difficult case. When all of it was said and done, everyone was kind of identified, and the couple was brought in to court and sentenced. Did you feel a sense of justice or closure?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's important to remember sort of what my role is. I mean, my role isn't to figure out in nearly any case, like who actually did it, who is responsible, how responsible are they, or what their punishment should be. Like that's not my job. That's the DA's job. That's the jury's job. That's the criminal justice system's job. My job is a very clear and focused thing, which is like, how and why are they dead, and what were the circumstances around? Like how much pain and suffering happened? All those kinds of questions, like the death itself. And so, I don't want to sound like dismissive or like I don't care, because I certainly care, but like I testify several times a month. And to be honest with you, when I do, I rarely even know who the defendant is. I get a subpoena that has the defendant's name on it, but most of the time, that's the first time I've ever heard this person's name. Yeah. Certainly the first time I've ever even seen them. So I walk in and they ask me questions, and my job is to answer those questions to the best of my ability. And I don't care who's asking them. I don't care if it's the prosecutor. I don't care if it's the defense attorney. It makes no difference to me. I don't care if the person's the most horrible human being that ever walked the face of it. It makes no difference to me. I'm going to answer the questions the exact same way. And when I walk out of there, I don't really care. I mean, like we all want to live in a safe place, and we all have this concept of justice, and we want things to be right and fair and blah, 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 blah. But I don't care. Like it's not my job. My job is to do the best job I can at doing that, to figure out how why people die, and then presenting that information effectively to the jury. If I've done that, then I'm satisfied.
That is your job.
That is my job. This is not a team. I'm not on anybody's team here.
Yeah.
Like I'm looking at my own stats.
Right.
How many catches, how many receiving yards, how many touchdowns. I fucking crushed it.
Yeah.
You guys do your thing.
Yeah.
Right. And there's a reason for that. And the reason for that is because if I'm emotionally invested in the outcome,
right,
the things that I say and do can be biased and
less credible.
Less credible. And so, one, I'm exceptionally busy because I don't have the time to even invest the emotional energy into it. And two, there's so many other things that ultimately go into this determination of a guilty or a not guilty verdict or a sentencing that are so far beyond my control that I'm not going to worry about. Right. And so I'm not like some guy kills something, he gets like a not guilty, and I thought he killed him. And I'm like, okay, well, that's what they decided to do. Like, it doesn't make any difference to me.
Right.
Because if I'm like, no, this is an injustice, like, I'm not in a good place mentally to do my job.
Yeah.
And so I don't ever really think about that. And in fact, there's a lot of, you'll see these like, I don't know, podcasts, and you'll see like movies or whatever documentaries. And it's like, these pathologists like, I speak for the victim and I speak for the dead. And like, I don't speak for the dead or the victim at all. I speak for the science.
Right.
Because if I'm an advocate for the dead, you've already put yourself in a place where you are saying this person's a victim, therefore someone must be at fault. And my job is to figure out who's at fault. But that's not my job.
Yeah.
Like, it's not. I want to have, I'm terrible with names, but two, like, I don't even generally know what the person's name is that I'm doing. And that's in part a self-protective.
Right. Yes.
And I try to compare it to, like, if your job is you're a body mechanic for cars, and a car comes in that's been wrecked, and they're like, okay, it's your job to get this car back up and running and on the road and looking nice and, undented and painted. You're not going to sit there and be like, oh my God, I wonder what kind of trips they went on. What the family was like.
Yeah.
And I just wonder, like, how sad are they at home right now that, their cars crashed, or you don't have time to say your job.
Yeah.
And in many ways, when you do that, as in this role, because I've seen detectives, it's rare, but you do see people like, I can't deal with this. This is too traumatic. You're making it about you, and you're not making it about the job and the work.
Yeah.
Right. You're making this like, how do I feel about this? And how I feel about all of this terrible thing that happened is now impacting my ability to do the job in a negative way. No matter what, the outcome is going to be in a negative way. And so it's kind of almost like a selfish, self-absorptive thing to be like, how do I feel about all of this? Does it fucking matter how you feel? Do your job.
Yeah.
Like if you were in a car crash and you're like bleeding out and you showed up to the hospital and this trauma surgeon shows up and he or she's like, you're like, oh my God, I'm dying. And they're like, oh man, this is so sad.
Wait, I don't got time for that.
Like,
Fix me.
Give a shit about you, dude. Fix me.
Yeah.
Fix me right now. Like, this isn't about you. It's about the person that needs the help. or the problem that needs to be solved. And so that's the way that I approach it. And I think that's the way that the vast majority of medical examiners approach it. And it's not caring. I care deeply. But I have to care about the things that are in my purview, right? Or my responsibility and that I can control.
Yeah.
Anything beyond that, I have to let go.
Yeah. No, I love that answer, because I feel like Felicia and I are kind of like that too, to be like, let's just get the job done. Like, fuck your feelings, pretty much, right?
Yeah.
But with that, when you saw those two, did you want to kick them in the teeth though? Admit it.
I
I would have been like, oh.
You got to keep in mind there, like, we aren't the funeral home industry, but we are obviously adjacent to. We work with those folks every single day. And to be completely honest with you, I felt terrible for the families. And because there's certainly personal stories that I don't know that they have been shared publicly or haven't been shared publicly that are absolutely devastating of how all of this was handled and what families thought and how families were treated. But then also, I also have people in the funeral industry who do a really good job. They care, and they have a very important role in helping families deal with the inevitability of all of our lives, right? And to then have someone take that trust that so many people rely on, one for their profession. I mean, some of these funerals are owned by generations of people, right? Multiple generations of a family, dedicated their entire lives to helping people at their worst moments. And then to see someone else take advantage of that, it's kind of like when you see, a doctor do something really bad, or you see a cop do something really bad, and then the impact that has on all the other people that sacrifice put their lives on the line every day to do those jobs, how that negatively impacts them.
Yeah. No, I love your answer to that, because like you said, you have to be unbiased. You have to you're just there to present the facts to the court, right? To the jury, to the judge.
How do you manage the emotional and psychological challenges of the job? I know it seems like you do a really good job of like
compartmentalizing.
Yes. Of what it's important. So how do you actually separate that? Is it therapy, or is it just by nature, by doing the job?
So that's a complicated question. And I get that. That's one of the more common questions that I get. And the question itself has an underlying assumption that I have effectively done that. That is one of the challenges of this job, is like, you can't 100% effectively do that. Like, that's not possible. Like, you can't see the things that we see and do the things that we do and have experienced that without it impacting. That's just not
right.
But human beings wouldn't be able to do that. You could do that, but that would make you like a sociopath, like have a functioning normal life outside, right? And you can't. I don't want to be that person.
Mm-hmm.
And so, the answer to that is kind of layered. And one is kind of, you have the immediate, like you walk into a room and there's horrible, horrible things that have happened, and the most unimaginably horrible things. And sometimes I'll get a question, usually from a student, in college or whatever, a young person who lacks life experiences, and they're just like, "What's the most horrible thing you've ever seen?" And you're like, "Seriously? Right. You want me to tell you what's the most painful memory that you have? Share it with us for our entertainment, right?" And so you have the immediate situation that you're in, and so how do you get through the work, right? Which is part of your question, which is like, how do you make it through a day? And part of it is the forensic pathologist superpower is compartmentalization. Like, that's what we do. And some of it is like, to my earlier comments about, if I walked into the morgue every day, I'm like, oh my God, this is so bad. Well, yeah, no shit, man. You're a medical exam. What did you think we were doing here? And so part of it is like, you sought this out. Like, you asked for this, right? This is what you trained for.
Been building up to this moment.
Why you're here.
Yeah.
And so part of it is an ego thing, right? You're like, I can deal with the most horrible things imaginable, and I'm just going to charge through it. Part of it is that compartmentalization. I've been here before. I've done it so many times. So I know we're all going to be fine, right? We're going to be fine. We're going to make it through this. And then the biggest part, I think, for me, and probably for most people, is it is a puzzle. It's an intellectual puzzle. And so you're so focused on the task at hand and solving that you literally don't have the brain space to think about any of this other stuff. Like all that's going to do is get in the way of you solving this.
Right.
And it's not productive and it doesn't feel good. So why would you? And so I don't even have to think about that piece of it anymore. Like it never even occurs to me when I walk into a room, like someone's been shot 12 times and I'm like, I gotta match up entrances and exits and find bullets. And it's like an incredibly complicated, intellectually challenging puzzle. And if you let the emotions of it get to you, you can't do it.
Mm-hmm.
Don't make it through. And so that's part. Now, that's the easy part, is turning it off in the moment to do the job. And lots of jobs.
Mm-hmm.
Anybody who's in the military, any first responders, anybody who's dealing with those sort of acute crises type situations, where my job is to get from here to here, however I need to do that, and focus on the task, and shut everything else out, right? And then that's the easy part to do. The harder part, though, is that you do then have to walk out of that more,
Right.
go to your office and call a family,
Mm-hmm.
and not be a robot and not be, you don't want to be like an emotional wreck, but you have to have empathy. You have to be able to connect with them on a human level. You have to show sympathy to them. And that's the mistake that's the part that's both very challenging, and does hurt. And I think many times doctors screw up, right? That's the part that the surgeon comes out, there's bad news to deliver. They tell it to you in a way that's like, well, that sucked.
Like a robot.
That was horrible. But not because they're a jerk, it's because that's how they're protecting themselves from the situation, right? Emotionally. And so that's the part that is challenging to do. And that's the part that kind of eats at your soul over time. And
The actual people part.
Actually the people part, right?
The living people part.
It's like any job. Like this leadership would be great if it wasn't for all the people.
Yeah.
The actress would be awesome if it wasn't for the parents. So it's just that's part of the deal. So you get to the point where you manage that the best that you can, but at the same time, like there's been lots of times where I'm on the phone. This is the most horrible thing. I'm sorry, telling this family how sorry I am, answering their questions, and I'm just like, you just got to hold it together. Like you have to like do the conversation until you can get off the phone and then do what you need to do, right? And families will come and they'll want a hug and they'll send you these nice notes, and there are times where you're like, it certainly will, I guess, puncture the armor, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to let it, or else you become a person that you don't want to.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, I have to go home and
You have your
have a family, my own life.
Yeah.
And you have to do that in ways that are healthy, and allow you to unload it with healthy coping strategies. And so, but that has to be a conscious decision. You have to plan for what that looks like. And I'm not great at it. I don't know that there is anybody that's great at it. But you also have the resiliency because you've been there before and you've dealt with challenging things, right? And so you come out the other side like you always do.
Yeah. And I know like a lot of first responders struggle with this. It's not, even those that don't have to deal directly with like the family members, right? But just first responders in general, having to basically draw that line in the sand, step over and deal with their own families. And like you said, sometimes it leaches into the other side, and, whether it be therapy, some people take up, bad habits, good habits, who knows, a little bit of all the above. Do you think that, because you're a horror movie fan, do you think that helps you kind of cope with some of that, where it's kind of like that creative part of what you do for a living?
Yeah, there's no doubt that, one, that's how it seems so obvious in retrospect. I didn't make the connection at the time that like one of the reasons how I ended up as a forensic pathologist was because of the love of horror film.
Yeah.
And what horror films do and allow you to do as a person to kind of unload and deal with the scary things in life in a way that's manageable. I mean, there's a couple things with horror films, right? One, it's a way to examine the world around you and the problems with it in a way that's very creative and safe, and you kind of open your mind to like, oh, I see what this is really about and how this corresponds to life. So there's an intellectual thing that you can do with genre films that you can't do with other films. Everything else has to be very literal. Where with horror, you can be very entertained. And then so there's that piece, and then there's also the piece of like you get to see really, really terrible things and kind of a comic, like at least darkly comic environment, which is honestly the single greatest skill that human beings have to heal, which is finding humor and terrible things. And then you do just have the fact that, well, you've seen really gross stuff, and you respond to that. And then there's the roller coaster ride of it. That's also the fun part of the adrenaline that you get from watching something really scary. So I think all of that plays a role in what kind of led me to what I do. Because there is, the last question makes it sound like this was the most horribly depressing job on earth, and it really isn't. It really isn't.
I feel like any job, honestly, we go through the ups and downs, the waves. I mean,
like they're stressful and they're hard, and you see it, leaching into the rest of your life, and you're like, this is not how this is. Now, I will say that my wife, like I said, she doesn't work in medicine, and so she, we go out with friends to dinner, and everyone vents, no matter what job they have, they're like, oh yeah, it's such a stressful week, and my boss and blah, blah, blah. And so Heather will always stop them immediately. It's because
Leon was going to win.
Never win that game. And I'm like, you don't even want to know what my day was like. Like it would melt your brain if I told you.
It's a frame of reference though.
It's everybody's job is struggle. Yeah. Everybody's job in life has challenges. It's just kind of the environment that you're in and what you're used to. And they all have levels. Like when I started, I thought it was really difficult. And then challenging, and it was, and then you get to the point where you're like in charge of all of it, and then you take the second and you're like, this is the worst job ever. Like there are moments where you're like, how am I even doing any of it?
Yeah, where you step back and you're like looking,
and you know the imposter syndrome, all of us.
Yes, imposter syndrome for sure.
And so now where I am sitting in today's world, there's no doubt that gives me an outlet to mostly in a positive way, just to share really fun time with people. My son, who's 13, loves horror movies now, and he doesn't get to see all of them, but I know kind of what he can handle and what he can't, and so it's great to share that. My daughter likes, she's almost 16, and she likes spooky stuff. She doesn't like the super gory stuff. My son likes the gory stuff, so my wife won't watch them at all. So it's something that they can do with Dad that's fun. And I could sit here for the next 6 hours. Horror films and what I liked and what I didn't like, and it was a great year of horror movies. And so it's a passion of mine, and there's no doubt it is both responsible for who I am, but also allows me to do the job that I do in a way that is free. Now, I will say there are times where I'll watch something and it's hard to separate that from my job, and you're like, oh my gosh, like that. I told a story recently where it was, I think, one of the Resident Evil films, and I think there was like a semi truck full of zombies, and they break out and they have to kill. They've probably killed now 100 zombies, and in the street and the road.
That's funny.
Yeah. And my first thought was like, oh my God, that would be a fucking horrible day at work. Like,
no,
deal with that. Yeah. Like to clean that mess up. And so sometimes it sucks. And sometimes you're like, that's terrible. It's not at all what it looks like. But for the most of the time, you're like, they did a good job. They gave it a good try.
I do like that you talked about your wife. It like tells everyone to kind of calm down. You had a pretty rough day. I love the support. I appreciate that. And I feel like it does take a village no matter, what it is, but definitely in your position.
There's no doubt that my life would be completely different if I didn't have. And she works full time. She owns a company. Like she has her own. Like she's far more successful than I am. On paper. Like but you wouldn't. The regular average citizen wouldn't perceive it that way. That she is. But she's far more successful than me. There's no way that I could have done any of these things without her. And there certainly have been times where we had a conversation, which kind of led to my decision to step away from the leadership role that I had at the county, which was be the coroner, which was like, you get to the point in life where a job like this is all consuming. It's a hamster wheel of chaos and confrontation and all these things. And I'd say, well, I have to miss this. I can't go to that or whatever. I can't go to dinner tonight because I'm dealing with this crisis at work. And she finally got to the point where she's like, well, Yeah, but your whole job's a crisis. Like,
Right.
that's one crisis after the next. So if we're going to use is whether you can or can't be there as crisis, then you're never going to be here.
Right.
It's all crisis. And I was like, you know what? You're right. Like, I don't need,
Love that.
need to do that, right?
Yeah.
I've done it, and I feel good about what I've accomplished, but I don't need to do that forever.
Yeah.
And so at some point, I have to get off that hamster wheel and do some other things. So
I think that's great. So I know earlier we kind of talked about the need for medical examiners, forensic pathologists, and everything. So if someone was interested, and you kind of went into it, but I just want to kind of sum that up, to be like, it's needed, what to expect.
What are the steps?
So the steps are you have to go to undergraduate. Now the hardest step in all of this, the biggest barrier is to getting into medical school plus. And so, generally people who want to go to medical school, they get an undergraduate degree in, biology or organic chemistry or biochemistry or some science related field. Now you don't have to, you can be almost any major, but that means you're gonna have to use all your electives to take all the prerequisites. And then you have to take the MCAT, and then you have to do well on that. You have to have a really good grades. You have to be a really well-rounded person. You got to volunteer. You got to save the world. You got to do all the things you got to do, right? And then you apply to medical school. And I sit on a committee that or interview panels that interview folks applying to medical school. So I know intimately what this process looks like. And then you got to get in, and that's the hardest step. And once you're in, then it's exceptionally difficult. I try to describe it to people as like, it's like going to Top Gun. So you gotta navigate medical school and decide at some point. Usually, the first 2 years of medical school are largely like classroom, right? It's not different than college. It's just way more intense. And then the second 2 years of medical school are generally, now they're different routes, but generally more what we call the clerkships, where you spend a month being a pediatrician, you spend a month being a family doctor, you spend a month being an OBGYN. And then you sort out who you are, what you like, what you enjoy, what would give you meaning and purpose, the lifestyle that you want to have, where you would fit in, academic wise and research wise and all that stuff. And you decide what kind of doctor you want to be, and then you go to residency. And then during residency, it gets more fun than medical school. You're doing what you can do, which is really cool. And then in many fields, there's additional training after residency that you have to do if you want to be a subspecialist, which would be forensic pathology. So then you have to go on and do a fellowship. And that there's only about 40 locations in the country where you can do that. And there's probably about a dozen or so that are really, really, really good places. But if you're academically inclined and you've done well and you're a normal person and you've got a good rationale for why you want to do this field, you'll get into a really good place. And the upside of it being such a shortage of forensic pathologists is once you're done, if you've gone to a reputable place and you pass your boards, you essentially name your place. Every major city in America
needs it.
So you like San Diego, you get a job there. You want to go back, in Texas, you want to go to Oregon, you want to go to the East Coast, you want to go to Chicago, like any city in America that you want to live, you can probably find a place that would love to have you.
How long will it take you to get from point A if you're starting off fresh?
Yeah.
So
if you're graduating high school today or in the spring, it's 4 years of undergrad, it's 4 years of medical school, it's 4 years of residency, and it's a 1 year fellowship. So that's 13 total years. Get there.
All right. And then what do you do? For continued education? Is it just like on the job experience, or is it?
So medicine has exams you have to take along the way. You have exams in your courses by your schools, but there are national exams that every doctor has to take. And there are 3 of those during your course of medical school that you have to take to finish essentially medical school. And then after your residency, you have to take boards. And boards are sort of the summation of 4 years and showing that you're competent in whatever, if you're a radiologist, you take radiology boards. If you're a family practice doc, you take family practice boards. And if you're going to be a pathologist, you take pathology boards. Now, pathology has 2 separate boards. One's anatomic and one's clinical. And so you take them remotely. When I did it, you had to fly to Tampa, stay in a hotel, and they put you in a room under camera, and you sat there on a computer and you took tests for a full day. And now you sit at a computer with a camera that looks at you and watches you take these exams, and they're challenging. There's no doubt. And you spend months and months and months and months studying for them. And then you pass those, and then you go and you do your fellowship. And then at the end of your fellowship, you've completed it. You have to take another test. You have to take another voice. And that's the same thing. You sit down, it's a full day exam, and you work your way through that. And if you pass that, now you're a board certified physician. But to keep that board certification in medicine, you have to do continuing medical education.
Mm-hmm.
So it's evolved over the years. It used to be that every 10 years you had to go back and take that same exam again, not the same questions, but the same setup. But with the advanced technology, what they do now is every quarter, every 3 months, I have to sit online and take an exam. And it's you take it, you get your score, you have to get a minimum score, but then as you take it, it tells you whether you're right or not. If you're wrong, it kind of educates you on, well, here's what's changed, here's why you got it wrong, here's what's right, here's some sources to it. So it's the original boards are more like, are you competent? Where this is much more focused on like, are you keeping up on your reading, and this is how we're going to continue to educate.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit more, I guess, functional and purposeful and
Right.
positive.
Instead of just, you don't know it, so you just don't know it versus
6 months and try again.
Yeah.
It's much geared towards like helping you stay up to date.
Okay.
It's a fairly benign, easy thing. It costs a bunch of money, but
No, that's great. That's great to know. That's great for anyone who's interested in this field, especially if they're already going down that path. Just what to expect.
And they're needed. So
yeah, they're needed.
Yeah.
Undergrad's expensive, as we all know, and medical school's way more expensive.
Mm-hmm.
But I certainly wouldn't discourage people from doing it because of that. I mean, no one's going to starve as a physician. It's one of those fields that you're always going to make a good living. It's going to be stressful. It's going to be hard, but it's going to be meaningful, and it provides a really great quality of life. Forensics is a little bit different, in that you're dealing with some very challenging things that other physicians don't deal with. I mean, a lot of doctors deal with bad news and dealing with difficult patients or circumstances. But forensics is a little unique in that it's one of the only fields of medicine that's combative. Right? In every other field of medicine, everyone's on the same team. Everyone's trying to help you get you better. And they may have disagreements about how the best way to get there. The surgeon wants to do surgery. The clinician wants to do physical therapy or whatever, vice versa. But they all want the best for you. But that's not true in forensics, because there's two sides to most of these things. And one side likes what you had to say, and the other side doesn't like what you had to say. And so they're going to hire someone who's going to say that you don't know what you're talking about. There's times where you have to offer opinions that are not liked by the people that you respect and work with. I mean, a lot of what we do is dealing with deaths in custody, officer-involved shootings, deaths in the jail, deaths at the hands of physicians that we know, that we worked with, right, that we have relationships with in the community. And you just have to separate all those things. You're not really the cop of the doctors, but you're put in a position a lot of times where you feel that way. Yeah. You're not the, overall, you are part of the checks and balances on our criminal justice system and on our law enforcement. The goal is to keep everybody safe. But sometimes people do bad things. And sometimes those people are in positions of power over other people. And sometimes you're going to make rulings that, the sheriff or the police chief or the DA or, the head of the hospital or a physician that you've known for a long time doesn't like, but that's the deal. Like, you just call the balls and strikes.
Yeah.
And the best thing you can do as a forensic pathologist is be honest with everybody, because there are checks and balances in forensics. And if I tell you something because you want to hear it, but it's not true, it's going to come out. So they're going to find somebody who's going to be like, this is not true. Yeah. He didn't do this right. And it's going to be worse for everybody. So the best thing, and I have great relationships with the police chiefs I've worked with and with the sheriffs I've worked with. And every sheriff, both sheriffs I've worked with in positions of leadership, and our district attorney, Michael Allen, we've had many of these conversations, and they've always said, the best thing you can do for us is tell us the dirtiest of dirty truths. Like, we want to hear it now. And if somebody's getting sued, their defense attorneys would rather hear the nitty gritty. Yeah. Here's the sad reality of what happened and what went wrong, than to find out later.
Yeah. Because they don't want the gotcha, right?
Exactly. They don't want this. They don't want this to be a surprise on the stand, because you try to do somebody a solid by, softening the reality of it.
It makes for good TV, though.
It does make the real courtroom isn't all that exciting.
I know you don't get the objection.
Yeah.
Objection, Your Honor.
Yeah.
No, thank you. Thank you for all of that. Before we kind of wrap things up, though, can you let us know a little bit about your horror? Is it a festival?
Yeah. So it's 6 Feet Under Horror Fest. You can go to 6feethorrorfest.com.
Okay.
And it's in Colorado Springs. Dr. Lingenfelter is also a forensic pathologist, is my co-founder. It started really like probably 11 or 12 years ago now. I had a house up in Teller County, and it was deep in the woods on a 35-acre lot. You couldn't see any other houses from it. And I had a home theater in the basement. And so
I love where this is going already.
my wife and I would host once a year, usually in October or end of September, a horror film sort of pseudo festival with friends, and by 12 people, and we'd watch usually start at noon, and we'd watch films until like 2 a.m. And
Love it.
we would play trivia we try to make trivia. We played in between, and my wife would make, she doesn't watch the scary movies, but she would make themed cocktails and meals that went along with each movie. And so we'd break in between, and we'd come up and have this big sort of formal meal each time, and talk about the movies and laugh. And it was great. And then it started to evolve over time, where I would, one year the theme was scary clowns. And so I did a bunch of clown stuff, but I'd hired, unbeknownst to everyone else who was in attendance, I'd hired 3 college kids.
Oh, no.
Clown costumes and stand in the woods. And
Oh my goodness.
came out of the theater, there was like a box there, a present that said like, look this way, with an arrow. And I had a bunch of animatronics and stuff set up in the woods and around the house. And so there was a clown out there waving, and they thought it was an animatronic. And then all of a sudden the clown starts running.
Oh my God.
Everyone screams, runs upstairs. And then one of the clowns was actually inside the house already, who then comes out. Everyone's like hiding behind the couch. Is like super cool. Another year I hired a storyteller who worked for the Pikes Peak Library to come up, and in the middle of the meal in the dark, candlelit dinner, this big table, it's very grand things with this big main room. And she knocks on the door and claims to have been in a car crash. And she's like, can she use the phone? And we have this whole like interaction where I'm like, we're in the middle of something. Like, yeah, I guess. Everyone's looking around like, what the fuck is going on? Like, is this real? And one of the guests actually like was so uncomfortable. She like put her hood over her head and like pulled this really see. And the lady, she was amazing. She's like, what's when I met her, she's like, I come from this grand story tradition. She's like, my mom was like descending from Romanian gypsies, and my dad was like Cherokee Indian. I'm like, you combine those two, like probably the 2 greatest like storytellers
Yeah, exactly.
in history. And so she was an amazing storyteller. So she says this whole long story about her car crash and everything. And she's like, what are you guys doing? And, I'm like, well, we're in the middle of a dinner party. And she's like, what is it about? I'm like, we watch scary movies. Like, I'm just being kind of an asshole. And she's like, oh, you like scary movies? I'm like, yeah, we like scary movies. She's like, I'll tell you a story. And then she starts to walk around the table, and it was freaking amazing. But by the end, she then lets it slip that her car broke down. I was like, I thought you said you were in a car accident. And then she's like, oh, did I say that? I'm like, you got to go, lady. Like, this is getting uncomfortable. And so I go and I walk her to the door, and I open the door. In the meantime, one of our relatives who was helping to cook the meals had come around and was dressed like a nun. The nun.
I literally just got the chills.
Stop. Open the door. She like, I'm screaming it. Everybody just. So that was sort of the genesis of it. And then what happened was
I just love you right now. I'm just going to say everything about this.
So right before the pandemic happened, so then Dan, my friend, he was like, this is so fun. We cannot just do this once a year. So he's like, I'm going to host a summer version, and you host the fall version. Then we'll do twice a year.
Nice.
And so we kind of mirrored, and we worked together on, what we were showing and balancing between like classic stuff that people want to see, but then finding kind of new stuff, weird, non-independent stuff to show. And then he would have food and we'd do trivia and everything as well. And so that kind of progressed for many years. And then we started to get to the point where I could only fit like 12, sometimes 13 people in the room. And people started to get mad because they couldn't get out, he couldn't go. And because I'd have to invite people. And then I'm like, okay, well, my kids go to an independent school, and so they have a fundraiser every year. So like, I'll put the tickets in the fundraiser. So charge a bunch of money. I'll give the money to the school, and then it's out of my hands. Like, you should have been on it, I guess. And so we started doing that. And then Dan and I started talking, and we're like, we need, like, this is our favorite day of the year. That's everyone's favorite day of the year. And everyone that comes is like, I look forward to this day. Like, you guys need to figure out a way to make this bigger. And so we started to look at, like, what if we did this like on a large scale at a movie theater? And so we started to sort of brainstorm, and then the pandemic came, which didn't shut that everything up. And then as we were coming out of it, one of my roles at Public Health when I was helping them was to help businesses navigate all of the changing rules under at the time. And so there was a friend of mine knew the owner, actually a business associate of the owner of Roadhouse Cinemas, which was opening, which is the dining movie theater that's in Fillmore. And he said, well, they're trying to open. Would you be willing to come and do like a walkthrough with them and just kind of talk through? And I was like, they're opening a movie theater, an arcade, and a bar and a restaurant in the middle of a pandemic. Like, okay, like, good luck to you. So like, yeah, I'd happy to come and kind of walk through it and talk through it. And so I met with them. They showed me they were following all the rules. They were doing a great job. And it's kind of solved a lot of the problems. But if you guys remember, like, there were no movies initially when theaters got back open because they had been shut down production. And so we get to the end. I'm like, hey, everything looks good. You're doing a great job. And I was like, what are you going to show? And he's like, well, we don't really know. We'll show old movies and whatever. And I'm like, well, here's the deal. I told the story I just told you, right? And I said, so we've been you kind of brainstorming for years about how to make this bigger. And he's like, well, you can follow all the rules, but if you can get rear ends in the seat and it would get our staff a chance to like at least like have people at the theater, like we'll work with you guys. And so it started a really great relationship between us and them, and that was now well over 4 years ago. And it grew from like our friends and family sitting in a theater to now, we sell out every event. We do it. We were doing it quarterly, but now it's nearly every month. And so some of them are, we do a short film fest in July, usually. It's all shorts, independent shorts from across the country. We go to a lot of film festivals. And so we kind of collect the best shorts that we've seen and invite filmmakers to present them. And we give an award, a jury award or an audience award. And then we show typically double features, usually by either a similar genre or a filmmaker. Mm-hmm. Sometimes if they're independent, we bring in the filmmakers in, they do Q&As. If it's sort of a classic film, we may invite someone who did the special effects or was in the film. And so we'll bring a lot of guests, special guests. So we generally have shorts to start and then, 4 or 5 shorts, and then we'll usually show a double feature. We still play trivia in between rounds. We have raffles, we have trivia prizes, we have games that we play, we have some interactive stuff, we have some actors who come in and introduce us and do sort of silly, immersive type things. But yeah, if you're interested, it's 6feetunderhorrorfest.com. We have an event coming up in February and March, February 2nd, and our March event's also the 2nd. Our February event is some foreign stuff.
We'll make sure to get that in the show notes. Yeah, for people who are interested. I know I'm going to go.
I'm going.
Yeah. Okay.
We will be signing up.
You will see us. You're going to be so sick of us by the end of the year.
I know we we had tickets still available for February, so that's a ways out. So yeah, get your tickets now.
Okay. Yeah, for sure. That's all we do. If we watch movies together, it's either true crime or horror.
Yeah, there you go.
So or we talk about it. It's our jam.
Every year we have a Christmas fest where we bring in Krampus. Krampus comes in. Oh, and he has a throne and you get to sit on his lap and get your picture taken like a mall Santa. It's a good time.
Okay, we're going to that too. We just buy all of our tickets for the year now. But no, we truly want to thank you for coming out today. We also want to thank you for your service to our county and all the surrounding counties for the years you put in and everything you've done to help keep us safe and solving those mysteries. I also want to thank actually as well, Loyal Coffee. That's where we are today having this interview. We're going to end this with a triple threat of what the fuck is wrong with people?